Okay, art lovers, be honest. Are you a dyed-in-the-wool realist and find abstract art confusing? Or are you a devoted lover of modernist art and find realist paintings uninteresting? Or perhaps you have eclectic tastes and find yourself in the middle of these two fine art extremes, so you appreciate all schools and styles of fine art, including those that emerged during the postmodern era of Western art. If so, my bet is that you are someone who probably appreciates pop art, as well as the other school of postmodern art that this painting falls under, New Realism. As you probably know, pop art emerged in reaction to what many believe was the pompous, inaccessible aesthetic of American abstract expressionism. I mean, just stop for a moment and think about where the modern art movements landed the art world by the middle of the 20th century. Starting with Impressionism, followed by every modern era art movement in between, the inevitable endpoint of modern art was non-objective abstract expressionism. Because one of the core values of the modern era art movement was to encourage artists to break free of the artistic constrictions of 19th century academic conventions by encouraging the artist to capture the artist's subjective impressions and interpretations and even their emotions via their selected medium. However, we have to admit that this was often to the detriment of the fine art lovers who still believed the primary role of fine art was to hang something on their walls that pleased the eye, but could also be readily understood. Enter pop art and New Realism as efforts by many late 20th century artists to return fine art to a more accessible style, rather than continuing to produce art that only appealed to those who were willing to invest the intellectual energy in trying to understand what emotions or thoughts the artist was attempting to display or invoke by producing totally non-objective abstract paintings like these. Now, pop art was denounced by one of the most influential critics of the time as low art. Yet it thrived and became the vehicle for artists who recognized that there were more certain financial rewards readily available by creating art that the masses would eagerly buy, particularly if the artist could figure out how to create multiples of an image that could be sold at more affordable prices, instead of at significantly higher prices for one-of-a-kind works of art. However, in contrast to these pop art entrepreneurs, we have to recognize that there's probably no single new realist painter who ever attained the fortune or fame of so many American pop artists. But for those collectors who see fine art as another way to fatten your balance sheet, will this lack of appreciation for the postmodern school of New Realism continue? I wish I had a crystal ball to answer that question, but I don't. So let's get back to this work of art and talk about it as a historic example of this less appreciated school of postmodern art. Again, this is a New Realist painting. This one's by Harold Bruder, who was born on August 31st, 1930 in the Bronx. He graduated from Cooper Union, and but for a brief stint as the chairman of the graphic design department at the Kansas City Art Institute from 1963 through 1965, it does not appear he ever wandered too far from the center of the art universe, which of course by the second half of the 20th century was New York City, because he subsequently served as the chairman of the art department at the City University of New York, known to New Yorkers as SUNY, which is where he taught painting and drawing for 30 years. Bruder bucked the dominant school of art and aesthetic of his era, and we should praise him for that independence. He formulated his own unique postmodern style that was more accessible and rejected abstract expressionism, and he embraced a style that anyone could understand. Check out his Wikipedia article and you will see he was featured in numerous exhibits over the late 60s focusing on postmodern New Realism. As to the painting that is the subject of this Art Digest episode, Bruder completed this painting in February 1973, the title of which is written on the back as Studio Interior, Susan. Although his model Susan is the focal point of this painting, she is not the only element. Bruder clearly intended to invite us to view this painting as a genre scene of a woman posing to have her portrait painted, and not just as a portrait, which allowed him to show off his skills as a New Realist painter. Note Bruder's efforts to demonstrate his realist skills by including the architectural elements of his studio, as well as the obviously contrived placement of blue and white fabrics with folds and creases draped over the two stools and laid on the floor. Now, all baby boomers out there will recognize the style of clothing Susan is wearing. For those of you who may not have been alive or old enough to experience the fashions of the 70s, you're lucky, because there are no embarrassing photos of you to root out and burn. However, here's the serious question I don't have a definitive answer for. Why is Susan so seemingly sad? Well, due to the tumultuous state of the USA in the early 70s, it's easy to speculate what might be on her mind. Perhaps, like me, she recently lost a cousin in the Vietnam War. Or perhaps, like so many others of her generation, she was dismayed that Richard Nixon was just re-elected president, which meant there was no guarantee that the Vietnam War would come to an end anytime soon, as had been promised by Nixon's 1972 presidential election opponent, George McGovern. Or perhaps, like so many art historians try to do, I'm reaching too far to conjure up a political polemic to explain Susan's distress. Could Susan simply be bummed out because she was unable to score any tickets to the upcoming Led Zeppelin concert? In any event, if your collection is lacking an example of 20th century New York New Realism art, or perhaps you'd simply like an original painting from that era which evokes the memories, good or bad, of the early 70s, you should take a closer look at this original historic painting that anyone who truly values and appreciates fine art can afford. Thank you for listening. Until our next Art Digest episode, please stay safe, stay strong, and keep loving fine art. Bye for now.